Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice, a publishing division of the Association of College and Research Libraries. In this series, we're taking a closer look at academic library consortia, organizations that many of you work with every day, but that are evolving in ways that are worth unpacking. While consortia have long been associated with collective purchasing power, the role today extends well beyond negotiating content deals. We'll explore how consortia are increasingly supporting shared infrastructure that helps libraries operate more efficiently and strategically. We'll also look at how affordability remains a central priority in advancing broader institutional goals around student success and equitable access. And importantly, we'll also dig into how consortia are helping libraries measure and demonstrate impact. Joining me on the program are Terry Galloway, Executive Director at the statewide California Electronic Library Consortium, Jill Morris, Executive Director at the Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation, Jenya O'Gara, Director at the Virtual Library of Virginia, and Amy Pawlowski, Executive Director at OhioLink. In this final episode of our series, we look at the shared services consortia provide, including ones specific to our guests' organizations. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about shared services, and Terry, let's stay with you on this. Maybe talk a little bit about what qualify as shared services in a sort of consortia context, and then maybe move into what are specific to Skelk and perhaps your impact. Talk about your impact as a shared service program and how that works.
Yeah, I think different consortia do shared services in different ways. Once again, for us, shared services are typically going to involve dedicated staff within the consortial staff. Other consortia may have shared services that leverage portions of people's jobs within the member libraries themselves. For us, we do shared services around shared print, to some extent around resource sharing agreements, definitely around licensing. And now we're looking at things like a digital stewardship collaboration with JSTOR. And then, most definitely, the one that is aligned with our strategic plan is called our Impact as a Service program. We're really excited about this one because it's come directly out of community feedback. Our people told us that they wanted greater hands on support for demonstrating their return on investment.
Mm.
And for a long time, we've been focused on the consortia's return on investment to the member libraries, where now we're focusing more on this issue of the library being viewed as a cost center at its institution because they don't enroll students. And because of that, they can be very susceptible to this view that they aren't contributing back to the ecosystem. So, what we've done is bring in Gwen Evans, also a former member of our consortial colleagues group, to be a consultant on this project, and develop a fee-based service that we can run and be sustainable. So she'll be working with leaders on campuses to evaluate stakeholder needs and who their stakeholders are, to try and find places where libraries are not well connected to those stakeholders, and to look at what initiatives or services or data or testimonials that are available that would really connect those stakeholders back to the importance of the libraries. So once we finish our pilot phase, we'll be looking at things like, are there other leadership or assessment training services? Again, that Skelk should deploy from the central office to the libraries. And are there other data services that we might need to consider to support the overall impact as a service program? So it's been exciting. It's definitely a new area for our consortia in the area of services.
Hmm. Amy, anything you'd like to add in terms of shared services that you're offering?
Yeah, so kind of along the lines of what Terry's working on last year, I engaged an economist to talk about the value of Ohio Link, and this service came out and was, I think, a need for our deans and directors to be able to communicate the value of Ohio Link on their campus.
Mm,
Ohio Link's been around for 35 years. Everyone knows that it's a good thing, but they don't really exactly maybe know how. And as to Terry's point, when I say them, well, we're saving you over $1 billion a year. What does that mean on an
yeah.
individual campus? So we engaged an economist to come look at usage across our libraries of Ohio Link resources and only looked at what was used on that campus, making the assumption that if you use something 5 or more times, you likely would have had to have purchased that either journal or book or database or whatever, and gave them a value letter. At each of our institutions received a value letter, and it outlined how much you were using these resources, which is a lot more than you would think. And then what it would cost them to try to purchase these resources outside of Ohio Link. And then what percentage of that content they could afford if they weren't in Ohio Link. So you could afford 20% of what your users used over this last year. You could afford 30% of what your users were using over the last year if you were trying to buy these things without Ohio Link's collaborative work. So that service was directly for deans and directors to talk to the finance people on their campus, because it was, what is this Ohio Link and why are we sending them this money? What is it for? Because it's not an invoice that says this is, Elsevier journals or Springer journals. It was something
Right.
that worked in a different way. I do want to talk about something kind of nichey as far as the shared service is concerned, and that's shared cataloging, which I think is really important for our members. So at Ohio Link, we have 2 team members that when we do purchase um, a, um, a collection from a vendor, they're going in, looking at those records and making them better, and then contributing those back to the community, which sounds nichey, but is so important
Yeah.
when we're looking at the changes that are happening within technical services across all of our institutions. So one big thing and one niche thing.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Amy. Zhenya, anything you want to add to the discussion there?
Just that, like, I'm so excited by the work everybody's doing in this space. It's a need, I think, at libraries everywhere right now. I think what Terry said about the needing to prove your value on your own campus, needing to prove your impact on your students and researchers, and that's something we can help with at the consortial level. We have our associate director right now is working very hard to develop we're calling it a data dashboard because we're not as creative as we could be, but it really is an institutional viewpoint built on Tableau, so that our institutions can log in independently and see other kind of the wealth of different services and how
Mm,
they impact them. It's slow going, but we're really excited about the kind of possibilities of it. In terms of shared services, one of the things that we still are primarily a collection development consortium. And one of the things that is most important to our members is that we do some of the experimentation and search for the model that is the right one. And I think in our state, one of those spaces has been open access publishing and
mhm.
how we support that. And whether or not that is through read and publish agreements or whether that's through subscribe to open agreements, diamond agreements. We kind of do the breadth of them in the state. And I think that that's been really important for our libraries as they figure out what feels the most sustainable in kind of the scholarly ecosystem that we're in right now and how they want to move forward. And I think that that's a really important shared service that we all provide, is figuring out where those spaces are, where they need you to go out and develop whatever the model is going to be that fits for membership the best.
Mm, excellent. Thank you. Jill, anything you want to add?
Sure. So some of the things that we're really working on are ways that we can leverage Palsy's sort of the I that's in Palsy stands for innovation, and how do we think about that within the context of these 81 organizations, who in many cases have sort of risk aversions that they would not allow them to go out and work on some of these initiatives on their own. So oftentimes they'll look to us as a mechanism really for exploring new approaches, whether that is, sort of software and technology based innovation, or some of the models that Jenny was just mentioning that we try to pursue, different approaches to acquiring content together, or the ways in which we license that material, those services together. So we've been working on a portfolio of various initiatives, and I would say that our focus has really, in terms of our strategic priorities, has really been around interoperability across our organizations. And that is so critical to collaboration, to allowing our libraries a sense of agency where they can work together in the ways that they really want to. And so we hear from them that they want to be able to collaborate in a variety of ways across all sorts of different system configuration choices, the different types of ways that they go about acquiring their materials. And they, of course, have a mission to share as libraries across these organizations. And more than ever, they really need it because they're under so many constraints budgetarily and otherwise. And so we have positioned PALCI really to take on some of those projects where PALCI is able to leverage their collective expertise and go after grants, as an example. And we've been the recipient of multiple IMLS grants, going back to what Terry mentioned a few moments ago, that have been able to really spur some of those innovative types of projects and opportunities to engage with the broader ecosystem and community of vendors and publishers and service providers, such that we can start to develop software that reflects the needs of our organizations, or different networks and ways of sharing information across our organizations. So one good example of that is the Collaborative Collections Lifecycle Project, which we partnered up with NISO, which is the National Information Standards Organization, and Lehigh University, to develop out a way, some recommended practices for working on the full life cycle of what we do in the collective collections space. Everything from, selection and acquisition to preservation at the end of that cycle, and assessing and managing it across that cycle. But with the eye towards helping our institutions collaborate together more effectively. And a lot of times that looks like sharing our data more effectively. So how do we do that? What are the ways that we can engage with the wider community to ensure that we're able to share our information with each other and really allow for maximized ability to collaborate in the ways that libraries see fit? So we've sort of taken that position on with projects like the Collaborative Collections Lifecycle, and now we are just about to start up a new project, which internally anyway we're referring to as Project Lighthouse, which is sort of a spin-off of the Collaborative Collections Lifecycle project, to look at the development of software that sort of facilitates the collaboration across a couple of different organizations, making use of services that PALCI runs, like our shared index, which has the collective holdings of our organizations together in a single container. And it can power that way a lot of the new types of collaborations that we might like to take on together. So that's a really good example of one thing that we're working on, in addition to a variety of other projects that we've already mentioned, like Haiku and the Samvera community, working together to develop that software. And in the resource sharing space, in particular, we're looking at how do we expand into a more holistic mindset around resource sharing that allows us to share not just the physical resources, but also the digital resources, thinking about ebook, ILL, and other mechanisms that will support libraries in really leveraging those big investments that they're making in some new ways, and giving them a sense of agency while they do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jill. I want to look ahead a little bit, next couple of years, and some of the bigger ticket items that might be on your radar to pay attention to. And Terry, anything coming up for Scalc in the next couple of years that you're looking at closely?
We're definitely looking at a transition to open access. And as the type of organization that supports licensing, we're looking at that transition and what our role is going to be in supporting open access publishing. But I think, number one, assisting libraries through a challenging time in higher education. We support a lot of small private liberal arts colleges and universities. So getting through this is job number one. And then really finding places for cross consortial collaboration. I adore this community. We work well together. There are, I don't know, I think over 50 consortia serving academic libraries in the US. And we have a lot of opportunity to share and work together that we want to stop and take note of.
Excellent. All right. Jenya, anything you want to add? Anything on your radar coming up?
Everything Terry said. Right now is a really challenging time in higher education. It's a really challenging time for academic libraries. And, we of course are a cost containment group for our libraries, but more than that, like we're really focused on what does our community need? What is the community development that is needed? How do we look for new models and new ways to build as we watch like research infrastructure change and funding models change, both in the US and in higher education more broadly, and to the kind of ripple effects on libraries. And so it's certainly challenging, but I'm always heartened by libraries' ability to collaborate deeply through all kinds of challenging times and find really innovative solutions. And so that's what we're thinking a lot about right now.
Wonderful. Amy, much of the same at Ohio Link, or anything in particular?
Yeah, we've talked about this on such a high level, and I think where Jenya was getting at is, we're all trying to figure out what's going on with AI, in the sense of, how it is so different right now, Bill, with what all of my institutions are doing and how they're engaged on campus, right? So just us, and this is something that I think we're powerhouses in this arena because we're bringing our members together to talk about what is happening in that space. So, we're talking about what's happening on the vendor side. Vendors are putting out all of these tools. We have to be able to evaluate those AI tools. We're talking about how we're using AI in our offices and in our work and how that might change how we work individually and also collectively. And then we're also talking about the effects of AI on our students and helping with student success. So this is where I think a lot of us are going to be spending a lot of headspace in the next couple of years, kind of almost making it a pragmatic look. Right now, we've been talking about AI as this big thing. Now it's time to roll up our sleeves and dive in and figure out how we're going to keep this moving forward.
Yeah. I'm laughing, Amy, because we almost made it through the whole thing without talking about AI. But that's great. No,
Couldn't fly to it though. We needed to.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah, it's unavoidable. Fantastic. Well, that's all the time we have. So Jill, Terry, Amy, and Jenya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You just heard from Terry Galloway, Executive Director at the statewide California Electronic Library Consortium, Jill Morris, Executive Director at the Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation, Jenya O'Gara, Director at the Virtual Library of Virginia, and Amy Pawlowski, Executive Director at Ohio Link. The Authority File podcast is brought to you every week by Choice and produced and edited by digital media producer Sabrina Kofer. Underwriting opportunities are directed by Melissa Carr and Ryan King. And for more information about underwriting opportunities, download the Choice Media Kit at choice360.org. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.